So, I've been doing quite a bit of reading over the last few days, and don't really know whether I kept seeing things that was worth making a video about, but there's so many separate things that kind of thought I'd wait, but I didn't want to forget anything. I've happened upon some of the charters of the various kings, which I didn't really know about, but they mainly concern the cities and how they're going to deploy justices and mayors and things like that. And it's actually as the city of London is spreading and growing, and they've got like a charter of the forest, and then they've got like the Justices of the Peace Act 1361 is like a proper act, right? But I think the laws over England are kind of like pretty general, right? And to the acts. And they kind of like start giving those charters out when they're creating new towns and cities. And those towns and cities are you're meant to they call them the liberties of the city. I guess it's like originates from they had, York, Chester and Norwich, for example, have got to have been around way before then. We're talking the Romans built them, so, and then the Vikings used them. So you've got these big cities, but the thing with these charters is going back from, somewhere around 1272, there's quite a lot of information in those charters, actually, which I didn't I guess I could sort of brief over a few of the different subjects, but there's quite a lot of revelations in these. These aren't acts of law. Well, they're acts of law that only apply to certain areas, like certain jurisdictions, certain cities, right? Kind of like bylaws in a way. But it explains a bit about life as well. I've also found all the minute books now of the courts, the minute books and the assizes records, and even the hundreds courts have got notes. Some of them you've got to check because some of the information might not be correct, because judging by the courts in these days, still, in the most modern of modern times, you still get blatant liars. So I want to touch upon a few of the things that I've been reading about, and this isn't any particular video. It's just mainly, I guess, even if I forget, just so that I've said it. So the first matter is they've got these. This is a ridiculous name, but they're called pie powder courts. Pie powder courts. Pie powder courts. Why the hell would you call a court a pie powder court? It's a ridiculous name. I've never heard that term before, ever. It's definitely a term they liked then, and they were throwing it around then, but it's most definitely a term that they've dead and buried now. You've heard of, it's not even worthy of Simon and Garfunkel, is it? Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. So these pie powder courts, they had them when they had a fair on. And, you've got your normal hundreds courts and so forth, but they had a lot of laws over weights and measures for bread and vegetables and coals and all these. They were really into, the weights and measures, so you're not getting ripped off. But they must have been really strict with it, And you could, breaking these weights and measures was basically an offence and so forth. So they had these fairs, these markets, because you can only come with a license to have certain markets as well. And they had a court just for kind of the market or the fair, for almost now you go to the fairgrounds and sometimes the hoops don't fit over, I can remember going to the seaside, and the gun doesn't shoot straight, when you're doing the moonshine corral, when you're shooting at the hillbillies and that, and actually it's a bad thing shooting at hillbillies, I just realised that. And crazy golf, effectively, there's a lot of things, when you used to go to the fairground, sometimes the hoops definitely, they only just fit over the thing, so even if you, literally you'd have to hold it with a spirit level to get it over, if it even did go over, which is, nearly impossible, and the gun didn't shoot straight. All that stuff, it's almost like the people who thought of it and devised it, that would have actually been illegal in these pipe powder courts for these fairs, because like they were actually trying to scam you and rip you off. Another thing that I've noticed is everything that it says that is illegal or unlawful and what they're granting as liberties through those ages and through those acts, we're talking like all the way from 1200s all the way through 12, 13, 14, 1500s up to 1600s, right? All those charters. They've got everything that's written in the history books now where they can pull one over on us. I think the royal family have been literally milking it from those lines. Every single line in there where they can get the better of us and actually get some kind of comeback from one of those lines, or some kind of pull one over on us, or something else. They're pulling it line for line. Even Charles's name, Charles. We could go into. I could write a dissertation on it if if you give me, I got. There's enough detail to write a dissertation on it, right? This is just a briefing, right? We could go into. There are thousands of things I could go into, right? So the when you think of like the Romans, we've got this Celtic era, and then the Romans come over. And they build Hadrian's Wall, but it's still forest. We don't really think too much about it being forest, It's still a lot of forest when the Romans come over, and then they haven't drained all those fens and stuff. It's a miracle they turned up at Colchester, to be honest, and made their way up here. And then they start building these, they build like, York and Lincoln and so forth and so forth. And then, 500 years later, they've gone, and then you're left with this, through that period, you've got Christianity popping up then, and you've got these Irish towers there's Clogteach towers being built. The thing is that so I'm going to bring this matter of opium up, right, because it needs to be put on the table and talked about, not kind of like innuendoed or brushed under the carpet or whatever, right? So the first thing is this, right? We need to accept openly that there was a religion, official religion of the Gauls and the Celts and the Irish, northwestern Europe. They had a religion and it had a name and they had religious practice, right? I don't want to go into too many specifics and start arguing with archaeologists, because they're archaeologists. We don't have anyone left to officially represent that religion or officially talk about it, officially name it, or any of the practices. But we've got an idea about it from the other cultures which still remain, like South America, North America, and so forth. We've got a very good idea about it, particularly from the use of sacraments and ayahuasca and all that kind of stuff, right? And it's associated with the sciences and self-observation and just where do we come from, and where do we go when we die, and just like observations of the human being and the consciousness, and kind of like, a scientific understanding of the self, really. That's probably the simplest way to put it. But they actually put it to practice, and it's not the nicest, pleasantest experience, but you can learn things from it. And I believe this was well established throughout the whole Indo-European Celtic world, and that they were actually practicing it in temples, and they were actually learning things, and it was tied in with the whole Druid culture and the poets, and they had their own judges as well. But at this point they're all split up into clans, and they've got separate kings, but yet the religious order is one religious order, right? Now, they might have had some dubious practices and some questionable ways of, justice, but, I mean, who didn't, I actually think it was a lot better than they make out. I mean, look what in North America, I mean, they weren't exactly, they got, with their powwows and the chieftains meeting, they had a pretty cushy setup, really, for, chieftains and decision making and all those kind of things, they got a plan. There's in North America, the Indians have got their own little thing going with the chieftains meeting and smoking and the rest of it, governance. It's. I think it's a lot. That was, this. The Aboriginal people were still actually doing a lot of travelling around as well, like over large, vast areas and getting to know everywhere, seasonal movements, So the whole model we got set up here, I think that to be honest, with the stones and the recumbent circles and Newgrange and so forth, and all of those temples up the coast of Africa and France, I mean, we're looking at people now who are talking about this is like going to be going back to when Ireland and England wasn't separate isles and when that Doggerland was still there. I think that our culture here, we evolved with these waterways gradually appearing, and then we got to master the waterways, and then as a lot of the land was taken away, they were already masters of the rivers and sailing when it became ocean, a lot of it around us. So I think we've had that the whole time, really. And then you've got, like the religious practicing as well. So there's definitely an evolutionary quirk to us, well, the people of Northwest Europe. And that evolutionary quirk was an environmental factor from the food sources and from religious practice. Now, other peoples from around the world have taken a slightly different evolutionary quirk, and that's self-evident in some places, right? Now, the thing with the Romans is, I definitely think that the Roman army, right, has got to have been powered by opium. There's no doubt about it. I mean, it's, particularly, in fighting and for pain relief and so forth, it's got to have been, top of the agenda for sure. And our disadvantage has got to have been we're more agreeable, altruistic. And I actually think that's why the Germans really weren't quite as altruistic and were more wild and fierce, and that's why they ended up defending against the Romans, really. I think we really ended up just being more agreeable and amicable through liberty and understanding, which is not really very good if you want to fight someone, really, although we did have all those bases across the south coast of England, fortified, and I think we did a good job for a long time, for like thousands of years, really. But whatever happened with the Roman army, I think what happened is we ended up getting a mix of people from all over, and then what resulted in it is that they were able to get all the others, get some kind of jurisdiction over everyone else and get them to do what they wanted, rather than over in England, they weren't making as good effort. We weren't doing what each other wanted to, really, which is why everyone was arguing more, but not more. I would say not arguing to a disadvantage or to a detriment, but just more, kind of like. It's hard to explain it, but I'd say like family arguments, really. But that, you can love your family and have arguments. It's in different ways and for different reasons. And I think that, you can argue because you do understand things, and you can argue because you don't understand things. You can come at things from different angles and from different points of view. But one thing's for sure, the Roman army, I think they did bring, the opium over with them, even though they were coming for minerals and for resources and to expand the whole Roman Empire. And then, they end up falling back and going away, and then we've got this sort of period where something happens and we get this religion popping up called Christianity, which is really, it is the oddest of things. The principles behind it make perfect sense, like forgiveness and, not sinning. All the principles behind it make perfect sense, but the symbols of it are the dogma of that religion. To be honest, anyone who has any interest in, like South American religions and things like that, it's more the religion of the scientists. I don't really want to call it Scientology, but everything is more self-explanatory and logical and reasonable and explainable, and it's just literally, the subject of understanding. With Christianity, the morals of it purport to be, for the greater good, which is not a bad thing. Just that the symbols are rather odd and strange, and to be honest, their stories are not that complicated. They're all quite simple and basic, really. It's not really Stonehenge and the longitude and latitude of the planet and deep mathematical calculations of Pythagoras. To be honest, there was more detailed and complicated stuff coming out of ancient Greece than what have come out of the Bible, really. The Bible is no Greek theology, that's for certain. It's all stories and parables. Some of them are highly questionable. But, so... Now, there's definitely a lot of action happening after the Romans pull out, because they call it the Dark Ages, but really other people have said that it's the Age of Enlightenment, because you've got all these illuminated manuscripts in Ireland. The thing is, what happened is you get writing introduced to the people who didn't have writing, but they might have had a lot of understanding and knowledge, but they didn't write it down. So you actually get them now writing these things down and learning to write and putting things into writing, or pictures, like, a lot of the illuminations have got. But then we've got this problem with the Vikings, coming over. But we end up living with them sort of amicably. Now, after the conquest, there's definitely something going on with, like, in the motifs with William the Conqueror using those Motte and Baileys and the whole domed motifs. But I kind of really want to start from around 1200, right, in this sort of evaluation that I was going to do. I've had to go through all that, really, to set up for it, right? But the thing is, right, so we've got William the Conqueror settled, and he started taking over quite a lot of England, except for the north, and there's some opposition and so forth, but he goes around and sends these surveyors to do the Domesday Book and take tally of everything, rips everyone off, tells everyone their things are worth half as much. Now, we've already kind of got York, Chester, Norwich and so forth at that stage, but there's still quite a lot of forest, and there's still a lot of water and marshes which they haven't drained those yet. So now around the 11 I think it's 1180, right, around the 1100s, they start to make windmills, right, which obviously the ideas come over from the Mediterranean because they were using them in the Middle East as well. So they definitely got a more engineering type brain in the Middle East. No one's doubting that. We should give them full credit for that. They've got like a complicated kind of way of working things out and calculating things in regards of machinery, right? So we start making windmills here now. You've got to give them some creative credit here. I think that this opium thing is a big thing. Now, the thing is that we, for the last, at least 5,000 years, it's not our thing, or it hasn't really been our thing. Although I'm not saying that we didn't have migration, but natural migration, not necessarily forced migration, right? Although, a lot of Romans came over, but it wasn't necessarily our thing. We had a different thing, which was evolving a particular flavour of thinking or a particular specialisation of thinking for whatever advantages or disadvantages that granted. It did grant us from stopping the Romans coming over, that's for sure. But whatever it did advantages or so forth, we built Stonehenge with it and made all the calculations for that. That's for sure. And there is another, there's a lot of ideology, symbology in what was here before the Roman conquest that just now none of the archaeologists are really, I don't think they've really given us credit for it, and it doesn't really, it's not necessarily something that's important, or I don't think they put a value on it. It's like, they're devaluing quite a lot of simple things. Like, there's a lot of skills that people can have that aren't really acknowledged in school, And I think that a lot of the mental abilities, like mathematics and other abilities, a lot of them are rewarded for in school and awarded for in school. But simple things like, dexterity or self-awareness or, agility, there's a lot of skills and a lot of human faculties that some people have, but there isn't particularly any grading test or award or accreditation that anyone is getting through schools, right, for certain things. And when you can do it, or if you've got it, a lot of the time it's not acknowledged, and it's only if you lose it or don't have it when you actually realise that there was actually something that you had, right? You got all these people, showing off, making microchips or, programming computer coding or whatever. And, some people are like, I can't do that, it's too difficult. But there are a lot of things that people can do that others can't, which just, they're not even on the radar. It's not even anything that, it doesn't even make a blip, just like knowing who stood behind you, knowing people's positions in the room when you're not looking at them, right? Or things like that, being able to pick a cup up with dexterity and not, knocking other things. We see clumsy people, but, unless they're really clumsy, they don't really necessarily stand out, or you don't think about it too much. And I think when you go to school and learn things, unless there's some kind of, financial value that someone can get out of something, they don't seem interested in it, So I think that that needs to be taken into account. Now, with these, I definitely think there's something going on when we're building these windmills, right, and knocking the bread out. There's definitely something going on with not just growing corn and wheat, but they're definitely, they're into this opium. Whether I don't know what they used to call it. I don't know what their name for it was, but they were having it, and we know for a fact that Henry VIII was addicted to opium at some point, and that's in the 1400s, right? But they actually get these courts, right? And they call them pie powder courts. Why would you call a court pie powder court? There's definitely something going in the pies, even if they're not hot cross buns, right? There's something going in them. I think it's something to do with ups and downs. I think it's something to do with, like, 1 minute you're happy and the next thing, you're not, and things could be not so happy or not so good, It's almost like, you're having fun at the fair and then something goes wrong, and then, like there's a bit of an argument, and then it's almost like, pinch of salt, literally pinch of salt, throw salt over your shoulder, So there's definitely something going on with these I think they were having they're definitely having some ups and downs, I think. And, it's all right, when you're happy, but when you're not, it's not, and, are you always going to be, it could have been a mile. What happens to heroin addicts is that, they end up, getting addicted to it and then, start stealing things in order to continue their addiction, In a way, it's almost like, maybe there was some kind of wave of affliction sweeping the land, but at 1 minute people are happy, and then they're not. So that's got to figure into the adoption of the flag as well, and then you've got all the crusades. So and I don't even know why we sent people over there anyway, because it's making people fight is not necessarily a good idea, but. Now, another thing that's happening as well, I'm not like pointing the finger at opium or any of the symbols or motifs from it, seeing that it's bearing the cross in the front of the Christian religion as well. Let's not forget that, right? It's definitely not illegal. So that has got to figure into quite a bit of what's going on. But remember that's therefore then something kind of new that isn't necessarily our thing, but it's sort of like it's becoming our thing, or it's being introduced, not only the people, but their customs, their religions, and so forth. Now, we've been conquered by William the Conqueror, and we get all the Domesday stuff, and then we get these kings established, and then John, and so forth, right? Now, in those charters, it keeps going on about treasure, right? Finding treasure or treasures to be found, right? They also got this word that actually means ancestry or origin, but not of a person, but also a plant as well, right? They keep throwing that word around. And at this stage, right, at least from 1200, funnily enough, even though we've been conquered by William the Conqueror, right, when we get to 1200, and between 1200 and up to, I'd say, probably up to 1600. Now, this is not in the main legislation, in the main acts, because the main legislation and the main acts of law are written a bit differently. But in these charters, when they're setting up their cities, and the thing is, they call them liberty. They call the city the liberty. It's the liberty of the city, the freedom of the city. So they regard it as when you're out in they have a charter for the forests, but they don't regard they don't regard you as being free when you're out there. They regard you as being you're free when you're in the city because of the law. Well, you have to obey the law, but as long as you obey the law, you're not going to get attacked or you have to defend yourself. So they're referring to being in the city as that's a place where you're free. Yeah, that's where you're more likely to find justices and sheriffs and so forth, but as long as you abide by the laws, right? But you're meant to be, the thing with Magna Carta is that you're meant to be judged by your equals or by your peers, right? But they're choosing jurors. Now, but the thing is, all the jurors and the justices and the sheriffs are all meant to be voted on by the people, right? So they're meant to be elected and chosen, right? But at that point, they serve more permanent positions than like the juries do now. Like, you only swear the jury's in. There were more permanent positions, although certain mayors and so forth were elected each year, right? But because apparently they didn't believe it was safe in the forests and out in the rest of the country in between, they didn't consider that freedom or liberty, because you have to defend yourself, or you could be attacked you could be attacked or ambushed or whatever. So they considered the city to be the freedom as long as you abide by the rules and so forth, and that's the peace, right? As long as you weren't jipping people off, with your weights and measures and so forth. Now, the thing is, though, the way the kings and the queens are addressing the public and talking to the public in the introduction, it's always like greetings, and it's always like they're not using these like terms like "so it be enacted with the king's most excellent majesty and the Lord spiritual temporal blah 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 blah." They're not using that language at all. They're using this language where they're going like, and so the people, the citizens, the mayor of the liberty of the city, and they're being very kind of humble and talking as if like everyone's equal and they've got the liberty of the city and so forth, and the customs and the laws and the privileges and the rights and so forth. There's none of this language in there that is like, commanding or sort of like all this insane, ridiculous, like, as if like, there's some sort of like deity or God or whatever. And actually, you can notice this change over the years, actually, between different rulers because their language slightly changes. Some of them are a little bit more modest, and then it kind of very slight more language comes in, a little bit more omnipotent, and then it goes back to what it was before again, particularly with the Scottish kings. But they talk about the ancestors of everyone. They're talking in this term of like everyone who lives there, like ancestors of everyone, right? But the thing is, I've noticed they're encouraging, right? They're talking about treasures to be found or finding treasures, right? And I've realised that in those charters, what they're doing, what the government cleverly does, or the kings cleverly do, is they actually, any evidence or proof of anyone else, ruling or being kings or whatever, is not necessarily that good for them because, they could be proved not to be, the rulers or whatever. But they like treasure and they like gold, right? And what I think they were doing, they were talking in terms of like, wanting to encourage equality and so forth, but they were really encouraging people to go actually finding gold and treasure. But what they did is they said, so this is like really significant now for archaeology, because apparently anything you find, any important treasure, it's going to be property of the monarchy. It's property of the Queen. If you dig up or find any treasure that's worth anything, apparently you've got to hand it in, right? But I can assure you the opposite, right, was going on. But we'll get into that now, right? They were claiming that if anyone finds any treasure, right, but also if thieves steal stuff and they take it unlawfully, then you've got a right to reclaim it, right, or take it back as well. But we're talking about also, all these, if you find any ancient artifacts or in burial mounds and so forth. I think this might actually solve the mystery of why a lot of the dolmens and the ancient sites were dug out, right? Or they are dug out now. They're definitely encouraging people to go and find treasure, but they're saying that it's theirs if they find it or keep it. But the thing is, knowing humans and knowing that people can be bought quite easily or bartered with or traded with, it's an ingenious way to get people to go out there and dig up all the treasure and find it and then bring it back. And if you say, if you find any treasure, you can keep it, right? Then people are going to go look for it and they might get rich. But then what happens once they found that treasure is that then, once they found it, then, they can, end up fining you or taxing you, or offering you, basically, like, it's nicking your marbles off you, cheating your marbles off you, basically. And then you've gone on the hard work to go find it and dig it up. Then you just, I'll swap you it for this, or swap you it for that, or even worse, or maybe even, sent some thieves around to nick it. So I actually think that quite a lot of the ancient treasure probably would have been dug up at this stage for various reasons. Now, I'm not saying that they were completely blatantly lying in those charters, right? But judging by the current monarchy and the way it's been going from then until now we've got the situation, the Queen Elizabeth, she was like, no, dig any treasure up, that's ours, that's our treasure, that's ours, you can't have that, that's ours, right? Oh, back then it was like, oh no, our ancestors, sometimes maybe, they got this other line as well, which is like, all our ancestors, or everyone's ancestors in this island, sometimes from time to time kings of England, from time to time not, right? So they're saying, like, they're trying to make out that we might share ancestry, or it's not all always invaded. There's some sort of shared ancestry, but really, I think that that's quite the contrary, particularly from what I've found out recently about our ancient sites being attacked and ruined. But this explains all what happened in Ireland. Why would the Irish people be going and digging into like Carrowkeel and all these other places, and you heard them in the 1800s, particularly they were going looking for gold or whatever, or but a lot of the actual treasure itself was in the ancestors themselves, in the actual remains. But so really, all what was going on in Ireland, because you see, it didn't get to Ireland till later on, because the thing is, when Elizabeth was queen, they hadn't actually finished Ireland off yet, because the western side of Ireland was still Celtic, and they were still in the clans, and they still had a little bit of the other religion left. They hadn't even been fully Christianized at that point. So they actually hadn't finished, believe it or not, they hadn't actually finished off the job that the Romans were doing when Elizabeth was in. So, and at that point, I think they'd just gone over to America. They'd pretty much just gone over to America at that point as well, and started over there, which is kind of ironic if you think about it. When they just about go over to America and start colonizing North America, they've only just fully finished off Ireland, right? Now, what I think therefore, all your dolmens and so forth that have been dug out, like in Wales, there aren't even that many in the Midlands now, because I think that I think from 1200 till 1600 they were encouraging people to go out and find treasures, and reckoning that if they found any they could keep it themselves, right? I think we're lucky really to have, like West Kennet and some of the other sites. I think that that's what's happening. What happens then is Ireland hadn't really been taken over quite as much. So what you get is 16, 17, just through the 1700s to 1800s, then you see, then it starts happening in Ireland as well. And that's when you get, just around they've just invented the camera and the photography when they're taking some of these early pictures of the ancient sites. But then people are finding out about the sites over in Ireland, and they start looking for treasure as well then. But before that, they were kind of like respectful of the ancestors and kind of like left them alone. I think that the kings and queens, with the, love for gold and jewels, they were wanting to, get those treasures, and get them up. And it's really amazing. Those charters are really, really, really amazing. They're also talking about these merchants of the mysteries as well. They're talking about like these merchants of the mysteries. And I think, so they've got all these laws and rules for, they've got merchants coming over from overseas and selling stuff and going around the cities. I think they're bringing a lot of opium over, unless we started growing it over here as well. And other spices and herbs, all different things, right? But they've also got these merchants of the mysteries as well. And even though the Romans came over and wiped out the framework of the religion, essentially, obviously when the Romans went then, there was still, in Scotland and Ireland, and maybe in Cornwall as well, still remnants. I think it crept back in, what was left of that religion, and then there was some merging going on with Christianity as well. Now, what actually happened then, when you're starting to come towards 1600, they're still referring to the merchants of the mysteries, and they've got these pie powder courts and all sorts. You see, we don't make heroin illegal. Well, they don't make opium illegal until the late 1800s, but that's when they get more and more into kind of extracting and refining all the chemicals and things like that. But up till about 1600. Now the thing is, what happened then? See, there were, even though they had Christianity, and even though they got, windmills and quite happily, putting all kind of pie powders into their breads, right? They didn't actually have that much of a problem. They were bringing Christianity in, you see. You've got kind of like, all the missionaries and so forth. I think they started deciding that, they had this like witchcraft thing, didn't they? Then after like 1600, then they're kind of like trying to stamp out all of the use of any other religion and religious practices, and they're starting to say, oh, it's witchcraft or whatever. And I think that's particularly coming from, like, the Christian church and so forth. But I've noticed that before they had those, all the witchcraft trials, before that, from sort of between 12 through 1200 and so on, they're referring it to as the mysteries. And really, you've still got, you see, you had all those Clogteach towers as well from 800. And then after the conquest, you've definitely still got it's still out and about out there. And then they really, really, really kind of put a stop to it. And then 16, 17, 18... I think people started getting interested in it again around the 1800s, because they started getting a lot more into their sort of, you got like, people messing around with chemistry and so forth all through the 1800s. So they're starting to get more scientific through that point. But so, I mean, you might not think this briefing is actually worth anything, but I mean, it's actually it kind of makes sense now. I didn't really, well, I mean, you can't look at a windmill and it not, I mean, it's self-explanatory really, but I think that all these terms like, like pie powder court and stuff, there's a lot more evidence for the effects of the imported customs and people but also ours as well, you know. It's in a way really the witchcraft and witch trial era is really rejection of the ancient customs, the you know the ancient customs of the ancestors and so forth, and really you know it in a way I think that the Roman invasion really was a forced entry. It really was like a forced influx of foreign culture influence, you know. But you know, if that's what happens, maybe that just was a natural reaction to what happens when two cultures merge together, you know. But whatever happens, that they really didn't like the religion that was in place, you know. There are different philosophies of thinking at play. I think the thing with us here, when we're not under bad influence and when we're in his natural state, I think there's a tendency, even though there are arguments, it's usually arguments because people aren't being fair or when they don't understand something. And I think that really there is this kind of like natural balance way of thinking. Whereas I do think that, you know, when it comes to the Middle East, it's more of a kind of, you know, instant gratification or just do things without thinking. You know, do things upon impulse or just for the immediate rewards rather than, you know, necessarily the rewards for the benefit of everyone. And I think that spearheads really the idea behind the Roman army, really. You know, they wanted the gold, the resources, they wanted, you know, and they just spearheaded it. And I think that if you have a more of a altruistic and kind of community-based thinking, you don't really want to fight with people. You want to try and teach people and educate people, you know? And it's not always about instant gratification or money or riches or valuable things being valuable, but relationships being valuable or, you know, beauty in nature being valuable, you know, or just, you know, and you get a lot of conflict between those two different schools of thought. And when they come together, that's when really you've got issues and problems, you know. So I mean, it's all over those charters. I mean, I'm quite surprised that I'd never heard of that powder pie court before. I mean, it's got, you know, it's sussed that out now with the whole treasures thing and why all the why everywhere's dug out. I reckon they were probably. I don't think that. I don't know exactly what the Romans did, but whatever was left when the Romans left, I think that the Anglo-Saxons left all the ancient sites alone. I've got a feeling they left them alone. And I think that a lot of the damages are likely probably to have been done when people have been hunting for golds and stuff. And I think that it probably, in the 1800s, I think that's probably when it had started to chip into Ireland, because they hadn't even finished off Christianizing Ireland when Elizabeth was there. So I think what they were doing through like between 12 and 1600, I think that actually is what we were seeing when they just started getting the cameras out and the photography, sort of in the early 1800s, you know, going into the 1800s and late in the 1800s, is that's actually, why are they doing that in Ireland? Well, I think that that's what they were doing here earlier before. So I think it was kind of like encouraged, really. I think they were encouraging it. I think it had a little bit of strategy behind it. And now knowing what they've done to our ancient site here, it's the wording definitely was a lot more. They don't use the word liberty now. You don't have the liberty of the city now, not with all this surveillance everywhere and so forth. But there's also a lot of wording, like the circuits, for the judges' circuits. But I think that they like that word circuits and devices. There's quite a lot of wording in those charters, and I'm like, when Alexander Bell invented the telephone, and then they got the Morse code, and then, around the time of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, sorry, Sir Conan Doyle did Sherlock Holmes? That's when they were putting all those telephones in the police chiefs, and I think that they were tapping into everywhere and listening in. I think that they like the idea of these judges' circuits will be judged. I think that they were tapping in on the telephones and loving playing on those terms of the circuits, the circuits of justice. When all the telephone lines are up there tapping into them, there's loads of little lines and cues in those charters, things like that, which I can just tell, it's a little Charles, like the line, they're coming back to it all, coming back to the fact that they got them to dig all the treasure up and said they could keep it. Well, now anything you can't keep it now, can you? Anything you find now, you can't keep that anymore. No, it's theirs. Started off like, oh no, you can keep it. You find any treasure, now it's their treasure. If there's anything left of it, what did they find and get handed in that now is vanished, or they melted down because they didn't want anyone to know about it? This is it. But I mean, you go through that. The sheriffs. The sheriffs shall have their devices. In order to keep the law and stuff. There's so I can tell now, like when Elizabeth and Charles had gone to school and they had to learn all these. They had to know all these charters and statutes and all the history off by heart, because they got a special school. I've got the Graham Smith, who does the Republic campaign. I've got a completely different philosophy and way of thinking about the royals to what he has. He seemed to think that like the royals weren't very educated and they don't really know much and they're stupid. I couldn't disagree more. They are completely and totally and utterly versed in their heraldry, pedigree, ancient customs, the full, entire, complete, total history of England, word for word, through all these statutes. And not only that, they execute things now that they are, they literally think they're poet laureates. They're literally coming back to it. Every little thing, the fact that, they've turned us all into Homer Simpsons, that we're all out of shape, we're unfit, we're uneducated, we've had our history ruined and smashed. They even got us to dig our own treasure up and hand it in and melt it down. We're being fleeced is joke. Being fleeced is an insult. Not being fleeced, it literally is an insult. It literally is a slap around the face with a glove, with a fucking golf ball in it, You might as well, be nutted, headbutted or something. It is an insult. It's actually an insult. And another thing is that another thing they started off, oh no, everyone can be judged by their equals, by their peers, and then gradually, right, if you committed a crime, you could be forgiven by your peers. You actually could be forgiven by your peers. And then they gradually took the juries out of the magistrates' court in the mid 1800s, and then they removed the juries from the civil courts. Now, the thing with the civil courts is that the civil courts were doing all the planning applications and things for a long time. You didn't have the council making decisions on planning. It was done in the civil courts. So the people were actually making decisions on planning as well, right? You know, the peers, not like the council. Although the thing with the jurors is that we actually elected the jurors. So, and they were meant to serve for life. So, in a way, I guess the jury, if you think about it, they didn't have like a jury like we do now, where you choose them at random and then they're gone. Then you choose some more at random. The way we look at the jury now is that it's completely fair. You know, a random selection of people. It's fair when you actually go and have a referendum or do a petition, because then you're asking everyone. But the jurors actually, we did vote for them. So I guess it's a fair vote, the people's selection, right? But then they were making all the decisions on loads of things, but it didn't have to be by rule of law. It could be on their own opinion. But they pulled the jury out. I guess I guess the councillors really are sort of like a replacement jury in a way. The councillors really are kind of like an elected jury of sorts. But ironically now, the councillors are supposed to be selfless. They're not actually meant to have an opinion of their own. They're only meant to represent the electorate. So how they can represent a political party, I don't know. If they truly did represent the electorate on every single matter, exactly how the electorate felt on it, you would be getting votes and votes and votes on every little single thing in decision. I think that if that actually were the case, you get a lot less complaints than you're doing now. But they're not actually they aren't acting selflessly. They're acting on political party agenda. So I worked it out that you can't have a political party. The idea of a political party is a scam, because you're really only voting for a person to represent that electorate area, those people in all matters. And if they don't enter an opinion, the councillor acts on the presumption of the majority who voted them in, right? But the thing is, you are actually having an opinion if you go and put an objection in, or if you go get a petition. And I think everyone does have an opinion on most matters that are put through, but they're just not asking them. And when you do enter it, they're not using it on the basis of opinion or rule of law. So it's in a way, really, your councillors are almost like jurats. They're almost like the jury in front of the mayor and the recorder. But for matters and business of the town, not on judicial matters. But really, the matters of the town are civil. They are civil matters of the town. But they're not a dispute between like private parties, Party A and Party B. But it is civil matters. I'm just trying to find out now about the juries. They pulled all the jury out of the civil courts and of the criminal court, which is a shame, really. And then whatever jury's left, you don't have permanent jurors. They're only like temporary jurors. But what happened? The interesting thing that happened in 1907, after we'd lost the magistrates' juries, but just before they took the civil jury away, that Lord Baden-Powell, he started the Scouts and the Cubs, and he started to start swearing them in. So the young children were being taught, morals and to be lawful, and they were getting them to take the oath. But you're not messing around though, because it's actually a proper oath. It's like quite a serious oath, is that? And it was by design of the House of Lords. It was under authority of Baden-Powell because he established it all and set it up. But what was the commission? What area? Well, they're declared as the worldwide scouts. So their oath of allegiance to an area is for the world. Now, I'm just trying to find out now whether that oath is actually of effect. It depends, because the commissions, so the legislation, like, the Justice of the Peace Act, the acts of law for the whole country are actually acts, right? Be it enacted in his, majesty, whatever. But the charters are not written like in the charters are issued by the authority of the king, right? But they're not. They're written in a slightly different. They're presented differently. They're framed in a different format to the acts of law. But they're like bylaws, really. They're for a town. So here's the laws for this town, and the laws for the other town might be different. And then here's the laws for the other town. Slight differences, like this town might have 2 mayors, or this town might have 1 mayor and so many aldermen, and this town might have a mayor elected every year, but this other town might have a mayor that's a permanent mayor forever, right? They're always the mayor until, you need a new mayor or whatever. There's slight differences. Now, the thing is, it's issued under the authority of the king, right? Or from Parliament. Why Baden-Powell, his brother was a King's Counsel, so they knew about law. If Baden-Powell is a baron, a lord in the House of Lords, and if he authorises young boys to take the oath, right, then if that is regarded as under the authority of Parliament, right, then those oaths are of effect, because those charters were under the authority, but they weren't acts of law in the same way normal acts are. In the same way, you can get standing orders in Parliament, right? Parliament have resolutions and they have rules for how Parliament will be run, right? But they give powers. So a standing order of Parliament, right, gives powers to a committee of like a court. They give them powers of summons. This committee will have the power to summon people and documents, right? So that's been given by a standing order, right, of Parliament. Now, is Baden-Powell's directions of the same effect as like a standing order of Parliament? This is the thing. And another thing is this. When you write a document, an open document, it's patent. And if it's if you write a statement of truth on it, like if you write a legal witness statement, you've got to put a statement of truth on it. You're actually setting it out in writing and you're making an oath that it's the truth, right? That's another legal principle anyway, right? So it has legal effect, even if you're not a Justice of the Peace and even if you're not a sheriff or a mayor. If you write the oath on paper for a document, it gives legal effect to it, which is the basis behind the petition. That's why, really, when you get people to sign the petition, it's meant to carry, the claim of the witnesses with it, which is really where your indemnity comes from. It's like the peers are judging that you're not criminal, and these things that you are doing in order to bring this evidence and this claim is required, in order to put the case forward or whatever, which is where the Crown Prosecution Service have got their own assisting offenders from and their own indemnity model. I didn't even know about the Act of Indemnity that they got in 1688 anyway when they did the Bill of Rights, but I'm just starting to read about that now anyway. But there were loads of other little things as well in those enactments. I don't really want to, it's difficult to not argue about things, but I think that, we're meant to, that one of the things about law is that you're meant to tell the truth and be honest, and, these are the things that I'm learning now. These are the things that I'm understanding, and these are the things that I've noticed in these documents. And this is our history, Where the frick did that flag come from? This is where that flag come from. That flag came from Roman invasion and subsequent conquests and merchants bringing their customs, people, and sacraments over, and our adaptation of them. So, but we've got our own customs and our own history and ancestors as well. And, likewise, are the acceptance of ours. And is it even acknowledged? I'm a little bit pissed off about, I'm a bit annoyed with all this treasure hunting encouragement in some of these acts. I think that's probably contributed to a lot of the landscape being massacred. And actually now it's still continuing, it's still going on. And it's even been celebrated in coronation. They knew what they were doing. They knew exactly what they were doing as they were doing it, and they had been taught it, and it's a mission. They're on a mission, I don't think that it's cool. I think that it's an insult. I think that it's insulting. It's you insult me. It's insulting, and it's under United Nations. It's actually illegal. What they're actually doing is a criminal offence now under United Nations. It's attacking a religion and religious sites. And it's also theft and robbery, The thing with those burials is that they were made to protect and preserve. And they've gone and encouraged stealing, It's actually, in the Public Meetings Act, it's an offence to prevent the transaction of evidence in the meeting and also break up a meeting, or even encourage people to break up meetings, So this is that. What was happening through the 1200s to 1600s definitely was encouraging the plundering of ancient sites and the robbery of ancient sites, which culminated in the 1800s. So it pretty much, and now we've got Balfour Beat Me and Care, putting the nail in the coffin with their fucking Glenjury Dolman perversions, their voyeur apartment blocks and their voyeurism, fancy, unstoppable builds where you got to pay to make an observation. You can't even object now unless you pay €20 to make an observation. So and this they've got people addicted to all these cinemas, hot dogs, all the things that they've been building, drive-throughs. The Irish were pretty much less affected than over here, but now they're on the front. I think they're on the front line. Even some people in Ireland who like ancient sites and who claim that they are, they're still like, they're wanting to, turn this town into a city or whatever. But really, the city's a mess. There's no. They used to call it the freedom, the liberty of the city. Now, there's no liberty in London. In some of these documents, they're referring it to the liberty of the city, the liberty of London. Now you can't drive anywhere without getting fined. With this ULEZ thing, everyone's getting charged for using this vehicle or that vehicle, or parking here or there, and streets are blocked off. You can't get down the roads. The liberty of London. I think really there was a freedom of the forest, and if you want to call, like, getting attacked by wildlings a lack of freedom, I think it's quite the opposite. I think that to claim that the city is you've got the liberty of the city, right? When just because it's supposed to be free of crime, but yet there's more and more offences with weights and measures and this and that. I'll tell you something. From those charters for London to now, it's pretty joke to call London the liberty of the city, because particularly with you, Les, when you can't even drive your car around, you should see some of the people who are getting letters through. They've got like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of envelopes and letters, charges. It's ridiculous. It's not the liberty of London. They called it the liberty of the city, and now it's quite the opposite. And the amount of pollution that's been kicked out of it. You can read through those charters. They're gradually doing more and more trade. They're getting more and more merchants in. They're getting more and more goods, and they're getting more and more different varieties of food and fruit and vegetables, and obviously from America as well when they started coming over. There's just more and more and more and more. It's a miracle that they actually banned opium, from the smoking dens in the late 1800s. They must have known something wasn't quite going right. They could have carried on, I think that there's always a time when you've got to say enough is enough. Actually, I noted also in some of these in one of these charters, I think that it's actually when they're getting smallpox, and they actually ban people from building any more houses in London. They say right. They make it illegal to build any more houses. They ban the expansion of London. That they're getting loads and loads and loads of building and expansion and encouraging it, the growth of the city of London. And then they have to stop it because there's they've got an epidemic, a disease epidemic, which they never did that during COVID pandemic lockdown. Ironically, it was the construction people, the builders, who could carry on as if nothing happened. But now we know that actually it was a lot of tosh anyway, a complete tosh. But they didn't even attempt to stop the roadworks and the construction from building or anything like that. They did with the smallpox thing. I tell you, they banned people from building more houses. That's what we need now. I'm not saying that I want anyone to get ill or anything, but it's happened. Actually, diseases put a stop to people expanding London, but quite the opposite with the COVID pandemic. Everyone else had to stop, but the builders could continue, I think, Balfour Beatty was beaten at one point in history. It took smallpox to do it. But, at one point, Balfour beat me, he was beaten, he can't build any more houses, miracles can happen in history, through all the invasions and the mysteries and the pie powder courts, pinch of salt, whatever, it's... We could do with those pie powder courts popping up now. It's ironic. You see, that's another one of the, Charles's, coke lines that I think that he liked with the arm grabber machine, when you go to the seaside and then the arm grabber machine. They didn't used to be rigged, though. Those arm grabber machines at the seaside, actually, you used to be able to pick a toy out of it fairly. But then they started cheating on them. So it was complete and total scam. And but all those crooked fairs that popped up, they wouldn't have happened because firstly, you had to have a license to have those fairs and markets. So I think that when they started doing those cheating fairs and those crooked fairs and those crooked games, I I actually really think that was actually, I think they knew about like the fact of, they used to have the pipe powder courts, and the fact that they're doing quite the opposite now and actually ripping people off there and so forth. I think they like that. It's that's why I say, like, if they go through those charters and stuff, and they like to get a thrill out of certain things, like their police chiefs' devices and their telephone line circuits and Morse code circuits that veining through the nation, listening in here, listening in there, making judgments from Parliament in secret. The judgment of the peers through the devices and circuits. So. They're taking the piss out of us, and as we're being plumped up and fattened up, they used to call it mast. Actually, that's another thing. The fattening up and the plumping up of the stock, so to say. We're all being Homer Simpson. We're all being transformed into Simpsons characters, and I think if we don't stop them from doing it soon, then we're going to be nothing but android fodder, because the androids won't argue or debate with them. They'll just like obey immediately. So that's it. It's going to be. What's the destiny to be of humans? Well, I don't think there is going to be a destiny. It's going to be like elite, served by obedient androids, or we're going to all have to end up equal at some point, or at least become agreeable and understanding of each other. What is true liberty? I actually think that word liberty was perverted. I think the liberty was the freedom, and then they stole it again for the city. There's no liberty in London now, for sure.